Hi, my name is Penelope Davison. I'm a game designer at EA Firemonkeys working on The Sims Freeplay. Thank you for coming along to my talk. 2 years in AAA, what I wish I knew as a graduate.
So, who am I? Uh, Again, I'm Penelope Davison. I'm a game designer at EA Firemonkeys working on The Sims Freeplay. I graduated uni around 2 years ago and got my first job as an intern at EA. The internship was 1 year, and at the end of that, I was offered to stay on permanently as an associate game designer. So that's kind of the fundamental basis of this talk. I am still relatively fresh from uni. I've started out in the industry, got a bit of experience, and so I've had a bit of time to reflect on the biggest pain points that I had as a student. Some of these things were, what it was like getting that first bit of experience, networking, and what I've noticed about that since then. Um, I've had a few interviews and stuff during this time, so I'm going to talk a bit about the job application process, but also what life as a live service designer is actually like. Saying that, I do want to put a really big disclaimer on that talk, and it's that I'm very aware that uh, this talk does suffer a bit from survivorship bias, in which I am going to be talking about my own experiences, what I've noticed, and what I think really has helped, especially with, again, that little bit of hindsight. But the industry is really hard to get into. There's way more graduates than there are roles available, and there are a lot of people who don't manage to find a job in games. Um, so again, this isn't a exact how-to. This isn't going to guarantee, your own success. But my aim is just to help you find what will work for you. Because again, what worked for me will not work for you, and that's kind of the point. We all have our own individual experience to leverage, and it's just figuring out what that experience is and how you can leverage it that's important. And that brings me to the first topic, overcoming the experience gap. So, one of the things I struggled most with from the beginning of my journey into games was understanding how to bridge my experience between beginner me to the me that had enough skills and experience to be able to get and keep a job in games. The gap between the skills that I thought I had and would need was just so big, and I couldn't picture myself ever bridging the gap between them. Uh, in a way, my journey into games starts straight out of high school when I was accepted into a games course in Sydney, which I did not go to. I deferred and eventually just straight out dropped out. My insecurity about the experience I would need and whether or not I could do it was self sabotaging. And even when I was studying in a games course, I at times really wanted to drop out or fall back onto other options because I couldn't understand how I could build, again, enough practical experience to be able to get that first job. So now that I've had a bit of time to think about it, and I have been in a job in the industry, these are the things that I think helped the most, or the things that I wish I'd kind of known at the time. So the first thing that I really understand a lot more now is the idea of cumulative experience. The first time I kind of came across this concept was in an extra credits video, which is pictured, and I've got a link to the video there. I remember watching it, I think, in my first year of uni, and the biggest part that they talk about, or the part that I took away, was that to be a good, well rounded game designer, you need to have a well rounded experience of life. And as someone who was still new to games and design and was trying to wrap my head around game design and what that meant, I didn't think that that was possibly true. I didn't understand how unrelated experience, or what I thought was unrelated experience, could ever help in design. Like, why would being good at cooking or gardening or being handy with fixing stuff, how could that help me with game design? How could that help me get that job? Over time, I've realized that it is so true, extremely true, both in design itself, but also in achieving that first job in games. So, keeping that in mind, let's have a look at my journey into games. Arguably, my adventure began with my Bachelor of Design at RMIT, which in a linear fashion led into my first internship, which was at a free roam virtual reality company in Melbourne called Zero Latency. After both of those things, I then, again, with that experience, got my first job at EA as an intern, which led into becoming an ongoing employee. This is true, but I also feel like it's only half the story. My experience to getting those first internships and that first job actually had a much longer lead time. However, while I was in it, I couldn't see or expect just how my experience in those tangential areas was stacking on itself and lending into a cumulative experience that was bridging that gap. So let's have a look back at the first experiences and jobs that I had that actually started leading into getting that first internship and all the rest of it. My first job was actually as a swimming coach, which is obviously a pretty far step from a game designer. But I learned a lot of useful skills. After working as a swim coach, that kind of gave me the experience to delve into my next couple of positions, which was one working in hospitality, and the classic customer service and quick thinking that comes with that. But I also worked as a parkour coach, which I could do because I was able to leverage all that previous experience I'd had as a swimming coach. At the same time as all of that, you'll remember that there was that course that I got into but didn't go to. Well, what I did instead of going to that first games design course was actually I studied graphic design for a while. So this gave me a bit of grounded experience in photography, some basic games and animation, professional experience in Photoshop, but also introduced me to design thinking, which was actually invaluable, and a lot of that I still definitely use today. Alright, so this is where it starts to get a little bit more interesting. After studying graphic design and all that experience in coaching and hospitality, I got my next job as an area supervisor of Santa photography. So this job was what an experience it was. I was responsible for, I think, 7 Santa photography sets, where kids go and get their photo taken with Santa, which included training and managing around 55 people, which was made up of customer service assistants, supervisors, the Santas themselves, all of that. And I would be teaching photography and managing the equipment and all of those things. This was a huge job for me, a huge leap in skills. However, I was also nichely appropriate for this job. I had experience in photography. I had experience teaching both adults and children, which is necessary when you're managing both children, but you're also teaching all the staff who have to manage the children. I had a lot of customer service experience, and yeah, I was just a little bit more experienced in tech than a lot of other applicants might have been. And this is where I started getting some slightly more relevant skills in my journey towards games. I got experience in technical support, in troubleshooting, a lot of experience in equipment and hardware, but also dealing with all of that equipment in a retail, customer facing environment. So this all led into me getting the closest related to games job yet, which was as a game master at Zero Latency. I mentioned before, Zero Latency is a free roam virtual reality studio and arena. They have arenas all over the world where players come in, get suited up into VR kits, and play a large scale multiplayer game in VR together. But this job, at the basic level, it is quite hard to get. It's like if you apply for a job as EB, it's the dream job for most teenagers. But the experience that helped me get this job was I had experience teaching both, again, adults and children. I had customer service experience, but I had all of that experience from that photography supervisor job, which was technical support, it was troubleshooting, it was using equipment and hardware on the fly and in high pressure situations. So again, I was, in hindsight, nichely appropriate for this job. Things from here get a little bit more straightforward. While I had my job at Zero Latency, I was also studying that Bachelor of Design, and using the combo of those two things, an internship elective at uni and using my established connections and relationships with the team at Zero Latency, I then got my first internship with the content team side of Zero Latency, which was a 1 month long internship. This gave me obviously a little bit of an experienced edge when going for that internship at EA, which led into my final job. Or my current job, I shouldn't say final. Yeah, I hope this helps demonstrate exactly how this experience was kind of building up into itself, even in places where it seemed or seems unrelated. Like when I was studying graphic design, I never would have believed that would have helped get me into games. But if I didn't teach swimming and parkour, and if I didn't study graphic design, then I wouldn't have gotten that area supervisor job. And if I didn't have that area supervisor job, I wouldn't have gotten that job at Zero Latency. If I didn't have that job at Zero Latency, I wouldn't have gotten the internship, which meant I wouldn't have gotten the next internship, and I wouldn't have gotten that job in games. In hindsight, it looks really obvious how all these different jobs eventually led up into an internship, but I couldn't see any of that at the time. And it was quite eye opening the first time I noticed that experience start to become meaningful and compound on itself. But it's one thing to use all that tangential experience to get that first job in the industry, but how does it play out and how does it help in the workplace itself? So the first place my own cumulative experience started to come in handy in the workplace was with that first job at Zero Latency, and the game that I was kind of shadowing on was Soul Raiders, their PvP experience you can see here. At the time, it was a primarily deathmatch mode where the only thing each team could do was shoot down the opposing team. And I'd spent a lot of time in, again, the game master role, watching players interact with the VR games and kind of understanding what they felt and how they interacted with the game. And watching these death matches go and watching the testers' feedback, it brought to mind some other experience from swim teaching and from parkour coaching, which was a philosophy about basically the value that players are getting. In swim teaching, if only one swimmer is swimming a lap and all the other swimmers are kind of waiting, you're kind of wasting a lot of time, right? You can have more than one person swimming a lap. Or if you have a warm up game and people can get tagged and then sit out and then they're just out forever, they're not getting warmed up. And it's the same for games. In a lot of deathmatch modes, especially in these free roam virtual reality games, you get parents playing with their active children, and they probably want to play in different ways. You know, maybe they don't understand things as much, or some people aren't as good at directly shooting other players, and they might enjoy another objective instead. So I suggested a tug of war type mechanic, which you can kind of see here. It's actually that floating ball which the players are shooting. The more you shoot at the ball, the more it kind of gets forced into the opponent's team until eventually, if you get it far enough into the opponent's side, it explodes and gives your team a lot of points. So the point of that was to give an alternative objective and to be able to vary up the gameplay, so that players who weren't necessarily as good at shooting other players could have another way that they contribute to the team. So, looking a little bit more recently, I was really excited to be able to bring my art skills to the way we celebrated The Sims' 20th anniversary in our game. Originally, the scope and the idea of the design I was meant to do was just to make a way for the players to be able to check in an in-game location and claim some currency as a thank you reward. I wanted to expand on that and make it something more special for the players because, again, the 20th anniversary felt like a really big deal. I was really excited about that. So I extended the design so that the player would be able to check in every week over the entire update, and every week there would be a new NPC with a new reward for the player to enjoy. The NPCs were from the History of the Sims franchise, so one of the NPCs was Bob Newby, who was that first default Sim you get in Sims 1. Bella Goth, obviously iconic. A more recent Sim, Izzy Fabulous, and it also brought in kind of famous NPCs from our game as well. What made this possible and made it a little bit more special as well was instead of just being able to give currency rewards, I was able to use my art skills to make some new outfits for the player as well. So Bella Goth's dress that you can see here, I was able to use that by repainting and adapting an existing dress in the game so that it would be her iconic dress instead. And the character in the back there with the pink hair on the right, that's Izzy Fabulous. I was also able to make his outfit by repainting over existing assets to create something entirely new. And I was really happy to be able to do that, to be able to turn what was originally just a one and done celebration to kind of an ongoing event that the player could enjoy and get a lot more out of. So hopefully that helps give you a little bit of an idea what I mean by cumulative experience and how it helped me bridge that gap between being a student and a beginner to being somebody who had skills that were useful and able to get me that job in games. Also, I hope it helps show how a wide variety of skills and mindsets can also help bring new ideas and new value to an existing team as well. And that kind of brings me to my next point about how you get that first job in games and just a different way of looking at it. And that's looking at the idea of your potential. A lot of the time for those junior roles, nobody's actually expecting you to be amazing. I thought I had to be perfect at game design before I would be eligible to get any job in games, even the beginner ones. And while sometimes, again, the competition can be fierce, it's not completely true. A lot of the time, what they're really looking for is your potential and what you might be able to achieve with a little bit of experience, a little bit of training, and they want to see the capacity for you to be able to be molded in the studio and fit the needs that they have. Help out the more experienced devs and clear the plate for others a bit. And a lot of that is just being able to demonstrate yourself and your strengths as opposed to how good you are in Excel, for example, or how much experience you have in a specific game engine. So a big part of when you're looking at applying at all these junior roles and when you're writing your cover letters and you're going to those interviews is I really think it's important to be able to think about your personal experience and perspectives and how can you demonstrate that. What's important to you and what's going to make you shine in those interviews is what will get you noticed at these interview positions as well. Now that we've covered experience, let's have a look at networking instead. When I was a student, I absolutely hated the idea of networking. I had no idea what it meant, how on earth you were supposed to network, what you were meant to do. Talking to industry people was terrifying. I didn't know, did I have to get along with everybody? I had no idea how to talk about myself when I felt so embarrassed to be a student. So what I'm going to cover in the next few slides is basically what I've learned about networking since, how you do it, some tips and useful questions to ask, but also why a network is useful and different from, say, a friend network. Why bother networking? Well, the short answer is it's your community. If you are in games, and these are the people who are doing the same thing as you, they know the struggles that you're going through, they've been through it, they can often share experiences that can help or help you avoid different problems in the future. Whenever you have professional issues, they'd be able to give you advice a lot of the time that is very specific to your industry that other people might not be able to relate to or might not be able to understand the complexity of it. They can help if you're well connected. Often you can hear about opportunities and you can stay on top of local information or jobs that come up and all of those things, which is really useful. It's also handy if you're applying for jobs. I didn't know this before, but when employees refer a candidate for a job, if that candidate gets a job, often they get an incentive too. So it's not always a one-way street, They can get something out of knowing young people of potential or people that they'd like to have at their own workplace. Something I didn't understand about networking for a long time as well was the idea that it was a long game. My understanding of networking was that I was meant to go to an industry event, sit down with somebody with a fancy job title, and then if I made a good impression, they would offer me a job. And I thought that was weird and uncomfortable, which is why I didn't like the idea of networking, because I didn't understand that it was a lot more natural than that, you know? You're trying to form these relationships over time so that if something does come up and you seem like a good fit, they know someone that they can recommend. The idea isn't for it to be a quick transactional thing. It's more genuine than that. The aim is to be making authentic relationships with people so that over time you can just kind of be there for each other in a professional sense. Related, it is a little bit like high school as well. You won't be friends with everybody, and that's okay. It is a small industry, and not everyone is going to be friends with everyone, and there are going to be differences in how people feel about, for example, AAA or Indie or Unity and Unreal and all of that. So you don't have to be friends with everyone. That's fine. You're not missing out on a crazy opportunity if you don't make like the perfect impression on literally everybody. Again, like high school or anything like that, the idea is to find your people. The people that you mesh well with and the people that you'd work well with. Find the people who make you comfortable and happy. And that's the best network that you can be making. Where do you network? There's lots of different ways. Obviously, any industry event is a good place. So award ceremonies, perhaps game releases, uh, things like that. Game jams are a great one. There are lots of people there, and you get to work intimately with a few people and really form some good relationships. Conferences are incredible. So, there were all the talks like this one, and I'm not quite sure what networking looks like online, but generally the biggest part of a conference isn't so much the talks, but it's the people that you'll be meeting and people that you'll be forming bonds with that are the real benefit of going to conferences. Specialty groups can also be really good. So, for example, often there are meetups for particular areas, like maybe there are Unreal Engine meetups, or sometimes there's women and non binary people in games, things like that. And obviously, there's also any of the online communities, whether that's Twitter or Discord or whatever your poison of choice might be. But just, if you're online, please remember to be nice. A note about attending conferences and networking is that you can look for help. You're not alone in this, and there are organizations that want to see you benefit and want to see you network and strengthen the community here in Australia. So you can often get travel grants and scholarships to attend conferences, even things like GDC over in America. Again, I don't know what'll happen in the future with that one, but I got to go to GDC last year because I got a travel scholarship through IGDA, and I believe FilmVic does some as well. Um, Same for mentorship programs. I'll talk a bit more about mentorship later, but I got a mentorship program through Girl Geek Academy. I got my second GDC pass through a random pass lottery that they have on their website, which is pure chance. And sometimes, if you're in university, one of the benefits of that is that you can do those internships. They often have internal game jams. Sometimes you have travel. Like I did a game jam in Japan through school that I was only able to do because I was in university, and that was something that I could do as part of my degree. So, for example, the random pass lottery, sometimes you've got to be in it to win it. You have to apply for these things and you have to be looking for these things. So, I wouldn't have been able to do half of the crazy cool things that I've had the opportunity to do if I wasn't actively looking and applying, but just putting my hat in the ring. When you're introducing yourself to industry professionals, I know it's really, really embarrassing to be introducing yourself as a student. But there doesn't have to be a mark of shame. Everyone was a student, but also there are other ways that you can frame yourself without having to feel like you have to just claim you're a student and then walk away in shame. I find it useful to be thinking about and remembering all of that unique experience that I was talking about before, and thinking about the potential as well. You can frame your experience and your potential in the questions that you ask and how you introduce yourself as well. So, for example, if you're still a student, but you know what you want to do next, you're interested in a particular field or something, you might say, like, you might introduce yourself as, hey, I'm an artist who's interested in serious games because reason XYZ. Or I'm an early career programmer who has an interest in learning more about how machine learning is used in the workplace. That way, you can kind of state who you are and where you want to be going, which is really clear and really useful in a professional setting, because the people you're talking to can be like, oh, cool, this person's a programmer and they want to know about this thing, so maybe I should introduce them to this other person who has more experience in that area. Using that in your introduction and in how you pitch yourself can help you, but also help the people you're talking to, so that they can help you find people who are more relevant to what you're trying to aim for and what your career, where you want it to go. The same is true when you're having a conversation with these professionals as well. You can showcase a lot about yourself by what questions you're asking. So if you're asking about, machine learning or ethics or art in AAA, that can be really interesting to the people you're talking to. And it can also help them know who to redirect you to or understand what you're after, and who you are as a game development professional. One of the problems I had as well as a student was when people told me to network, I had no idea. I can introduce myself maybe, but what was I meant to do after that? What do I talk to them about? But if you are lost and you're not quite sure, remember you can just talk to them like regular humans and get to know them. But in a professional setting, if you want to be talking about industry things, you can be asking them about their experiences. You can think about the things that you don't know, the things that make you nervous, and ask them how they dealt with that or if they've ever experienced that. For example, for me as a designer, often the things I might be asking are like, hey, what's it like designing on a first person shooter? I know what my design processes are like. What would you say the differences are? You can ask about the interesting problems they've worked on, or maybe really specific parts of the job that they work at or the games that they're on. Again, the commentary that you have or the things that you're asking about can say a lot about you, and can help really demonstrate who you are and a lot of that potential to industry as well. When you're following up with people, remember it's not just about having their card and then never following up on that. It can be really easy to get lost between different business cards and all of that. So some methods that people have, some people will, on the business cards themselves, they'll write a couple of notes about what they spoke about, so that if they want to follow up on that, they can send an email later or a LinkedIn message, whatever the case may be, and be like, hi, we were talking about XYZ. I have a couple more questions on that topic. Is it okay if we meet up for coffee? Or in this day and age, maybe it's meet up for a Zoom chat. So it can be really easy and casual to follow up, and just keep having these conversations. On that note, please remember that no matter how you're networking and where, it's still a professional event and they're still real humans you're talking to, so be respectful. Even if it's at a bar, which a lot of game dev events are, don't get drunk. You can end up making a bad impression, which is obviously the opposite of what you want, or you can disrespect people, so just be cool. um, be respectful to other people's time as well, and make sure you keep anything that you ask of others kind of proportionate to the relationship that you have. If you've met somebody once, casually at some coffee meetup, then if you follow up in an email, it's probably not the best if you immediately ask for a referral to a job or ask for an ongoing mentorship. Maybe after you've caught up a couple of times or you have a better relationship, that's more appropriate. So just make sure you're giving people space as well, space to say no, space to offer alternatives, or again, if you're at a networking event in a bar, give people space to leave and talk to other people, because they want to be networking too. I'm going to move on now onto the job application process. So this is specifically going to be my experience of applying for jobs at EA. I've applied for 2 jobs here. The first one was the internship, which I got. The second one was when I was still on my internship. I applied for the associate position, which I have now, and I actually got rejected. So it means I've gone through this process twice, and I have a little bit of feedback and context on what went well and what didn't go so well. The first stage of an application is obviously handing in your resume and cover letter. So some general advice is, first of all, on the cover letter, um, I've done a bit of recruitment as well. Like when I was doing that Santa photography job, I would get a million resumes, and there would be a lot of people who would be technically qualified. But the part that makes you stand out a lot more, in my opinion, is often the cover letter. The cover letter is how you make your application personal and meaningful. That's where you can explain your value and all of those things that we've spoken about. That's where you can talk about why you're a good fit and how your potential lends itself to that company. Instead of putting in an application being like, hey, I would make a great game designer, the cover letter is where you can explicitly state why you would make a good game designer at EA specifically, or wherever else you're applying. So please keep that in mind. If you're picking what to put in a portfolio or what games and such to include in your resume, cut out the noise. You probably hear it a lot, but quality over quantity every day of the week. People can only judge you on what they can see in your resume. So if you're only showing 1 or 2 pieces of your top tier work, then that's awesome. You're showcasing yourself as a top tier applicant. If you have 1 or 2 really good pieces, but you're drowning it out with a bunch of work that's less formed, less representative of your potential, then that's not doing yourself any favors, and it means that they can judge you on those things as well, which isn't what you want. Very related on that as well, I would recommend that you never ever put a picture of yourself on any application. You want them to be judging you on your work or your potential and what you have to say. If you put a picture of yourself, no matter how good a human they are, it's going to be really hard for them to ignore that, and hard for them not to even unconsciously judge you on your appearance, which is, again, almost always going to have a negative impact for you. The next stage in the EA interview process was actually a phone interview, which I don't remember much about, honestly. More, it's kind of like a quick character test before they get into the real stuff, um, where they test your actual skills and stuff a little bit further down the line. So just try to be you, relax, try and represent yourself as best you can, and make sure you've done a little bit of preliminary research. The only question I actually remember from my phone interview was when they asked why EA. So if you wrote your cover letter well, you've probably already answered this question and you'll be able to talk to it really easily. So just make sure you've done a little bit of research. After the phone interview, once they've had a quick assessment of your personality, they're going to have a quick assessment of your skills. So again, this is me going for a design position, so I'm not quite sure what it's like for other types of roles. But for, again, a design job, they gave me a design test. And what that is they just give you a brief, and your job is to, before the deadline, make a design that fits that brief. There are a couple of constraints, but the hardest part, in my opinion, was for these briefs for Firemonkeys, you could pick any game and you could kind of pick, in a way, whatever you wanted to do your design test on. So in this case, if you have the freedom to choose what your design test is about, the most useful feedback I can give is think about the studio that you're applying for. I chose for my design tests for the first one, I chose to do my design test on Animal Crossing Pocket Camp because it was a mobile title, a live service mobile title, which was the same as the studio I was applying for. It's mostly a live service studio, and it was most applicable to it. You have to also balance that against your strengths. So, if you haven't played a mobile game before, that can be a lot more challenging because it's harder to pick a design that also showcases your strengths if it's in an area that you're not so familiar with. So I think it's important to continue your research, either first to the studio itself, but then into the types of games that they're designing, and show how you'd fit in that company by picking a design that lends itself to that company in that position. The next stage was an in-person interview. And at a AAA studio, these interviews are a little bit different from, say, going for an interview for a hospitality role. There were multiple stages. So the first part was, I think, talking to a room of 3 designers. Then I had to talk to the producer, and then I had to talk to the development director. So it can be really long. This can take 3 hours easy. Really depends how it goes and how many questions they have, but just be ready for that. And really make sure that you've reviewed your resume, that you've thought about everything, every game that you've put on it, because they're going to want to hear you talk about it. They're going to want to know about your work, why you designed what you did, and they want to hear about the details. A big part of these interviews is showing all of your potential and all of your design thinking and all of those skills. So again, just make sure it's all recent in your mind and you're ready to talk about it, and you're ready to talk about why you did this. Why did you pick this for your design test? Why did you design your game that way? Because that's what's going to make you special, Also, be ready to talk about the industry as well. Having a bit of generalized current game and industry knowledge is really useful, including some details on that so that, if they're asking you about what do you think are good examples of game design in the market, for example, that question won't take you by surprise. You'll be ready to talk about these things. The more specifics that you're able to talk to as well, the more useful you can be. For example, a question I didn't answer very well in one of my interviews was I had to pick a recent game, a relatively recent game to talk about, and I did. And I had to talk about my favorite system in that game, which took me by surprise, and I had a surprisingly hard time trying to think of my favorite system within a game that I liked. So be ready for those sorts of questions. Congratulations! They've given you an offer, which is awesome. But often when you get that offer, it's the start of a bit of a negotiation between you and the company. So to this, I strongly, strongly recommend that once again, be prepared. You should have researched your role. You should have researched what you should expect to be earning. The more that you've researched, the easier it's going to be to be able to go into this negotiation prepared. So you can negotiate for more than money as well a lot of the time. Like maybe for a position, if they won't match the amount of money that you're looking for example, maybe you can negotiate more annual leave, or Friday, half a day off every couple of weeks, or parking. It's going to be different depending what company you're applying for. So keep that in mind. But I really want to stress that if they've made you an offer, you should be negotiating. You should ask more than what you think you should. Always. Every time. And I know it's really, really hard and it's embarrassing and it's stressful. But for example, if I think back to my job when I first applied at Zero Latency, I had very niche experience. So, working with adults and children, customer service, working with tech, all of those things, which made me really suited for the job. The same is true for when you're applying for industry professional positions. While, yes, there's a lot of competition, there's a lot of applicants, if they've picked you, it's for a reason. You can negotiate with that, and they're not going to say no to you or drop the offer just because you asked for a little bit more money. They want you. And you're, again, often nichely appropriate for a role. So ask for more than you think you should. Even if you get talked down, it can only end in your favor. When you're negotiating as well, that also ties back to being prepared and doing that research. You should be able to back up why you're asking for the amount of money that you want. So, for example, I now have a permanent position with EA, but when I first got offered a job at the end of my internship, it was actually for a temporary position. And I argued. I was like, all right, if you're going to give me a temporary position, I want X amount extra money because when you're a permanent employee, you get benefits X, Y, and Z, and that equals in monetary value this amount more. So as a temporary employee, it's only fair if I'm given X amount of money instead, which was a lot more money that I asked for. And I didn't get the extra money, which, maybe that's a shame. But in response, they gave me the permanent position instead, which I didn't think was even a possibility. So that was a huge, huge win, and it's really changed my life for the better. And it only happened because I asked. A similar scenario happened when I did my first internship at Zero Latency. So I'd mentioned I was already working on the operations team, but not the content team. And when I first was talking to them about an internship, and we were kind of having a what I thought was an interview, but it was actually talking about what we would do during the internship kind of meeting. I asked to be paid and what they were going to pay me, and they were surprised. But they didn't get angry, they didn't reprimand me, they just kind of realized that, oh yeah, that is a thing that should happen. And so I got paid for that internship as well, which if I hadn't been paid for, that would have been really hard because I would have been at an internship, full-time uni, and working and trying to keep my life together. But there's a large chance that I wouldn't have been paid for that internship if I hadn't have asked for it. So please, 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 always ask, always negotiate, because it is in your best interest to do so. So let's say you got the job, you successfully negotiated for like $1 million, so congratulations. The next issue I had as I moved into the industry was actually I struggled a lot with what I should do after that point. Up to that point, the idea of what I was meant to do for a career was quite linear. I had an idea that I'd finish school, get good grades, then I could get into uni and I would do more good work, get good grades, and that would give me a job. And then the path kind of stops. I didn't really know what I was meant to do once I'd gotten that job. And that was hard, I'll admit. I started to panic. After a while, once I'd kind of started getting used to it, I started having problems. I felt directionless, I wasn't setting goals, I felt like I was stagnating, I had no idea what I was doing, I was getting huge amounts of imposter syndrome, and there was just a lot of bad feelings, and I didn't know what to do, and I couldn't contextualize any of it because I hadn't worked in the industry before. I hadn't worked in a full-time job like this before. This brings me back to the importance of having professional contacts and mentorship. Again, you're not alone. People have done this before, and the benefit of having a professional network that you can't get from a friend network is that often they've actually gone through specifically the issues that you've been having. You can talk to them and figure out more about what's going on. Like if you just have a nebulous feeling of something's wrong, but I don't know what it is, they can often help you figure that out. And that's what I got from mentorship as well. I had an amazing mentor that turned my year around from I started feeling terrible about everything. I was getting a lot of anxiety. And it wasn't until I had a professional mentor that I could talk to about these issues that I was having that I was able to kind of realize what was actually going on and that no, I wasn't crazy. I had these problems that I can address and I can talk to people about and I can address in the workplace as well and start figuring out solutions for them. So that shared experience is invaluable to contextualizing issues that you have in your professional role, but also help you set professional goals and start aiming towards a career or any career moves that you would like to make. So now I'm going to have a look at live service design, aka what my job actually is and what I do, or at least a lot of what I do. Because it's actually something I couldn't picture either when I was in school. I had no idea what design looked like in an actual job and what I would do. So this is what I do. So the game I work on, The Sims Freeplay, is about 8 years old now. So it's quite old. It's been around a while, but we are constantly updating it and releasing new updates. So that includes live service events for the players to complete. And as part of that, it comes with a lot of content design and creating new things for the players to experience in the game. On the back end, to do all that content design, we have a lot of documentation, there's a lot of iteration and researching. Live service event systems and design. There's a lot of different event systems in our game, but what it is essentially a event that runs on a specific calendar date or specific calendar days, and the player can engage in them in whatever fashion, depending on the event, and earn prizes. So a big part of my job is creative writing that comes along with this, describing prizes, adding in goals that are specific to themed events, for example. A big part of my job is also implementation, so setting up an event in the game system using bespoke tools and such. A big part of content design is actually organizing prize structures as well. So you can kind of see here the prizes escalate as you get further into an event, which drives people towards the end. And often my job also includes a bit of Simteria design, which is very specific to The Sims, but it's designing houses and making beautiful houses that players want so that they complete the events in an effort to earn them. I mentioned content planning a little bit, and again, this is planning all of the content that goes into the game. In our game specifically, we have a lot of items that get released to the player through live events. So again, it's The Sims, so it's things like lights, tables, chairs, bay windows, all sorts of things like that. And it's actually a really long process to be able to develop assets for the game. You start with planning out an update and the themes. You have to pick. We make mood boards of the themes once we've picked them. We have to document every single item that we want to put in the game, which is a lot. We then have to plan, what actions are on these items and the animations that go on them, and is all of this in scope? And then when we actually get the items and all the assets are being created, there's implementing them and cleaning them up to make sure that they work as intended. The more items that we put in the game and the more live events that we do, the more work it is. And one of the difficult parts with content design as well is actually avoiding hot potato. And by that I mean every time you write something down in a document and you need to communicate it to someone else. So if I decide, hey, I want this specific lampshade in the game, and I tell that to the artist might give it to another artist to work on. And so when they tell the next artist, how do we make sure that they still have the right idea and they understand the original intent? Every time the information passes through another person, often information gets lost. So documentation and effective documentation becomes a really important part of content design and planning. As part of that, I was talking about the documentation, and there's also a lot of documentation that's not for the items themselves, but for the rest of the content. So, when do the events start? Which events are we running? What should we expect? And the important things of this is when we're looking at our documentation, we're thinking about who the audience is. In this case, a lot of the audience is often QA, so they know what they should be looking for, so that they can make test plans, and they know what to check when we are trying to validate our game and our branches for release. Often it's also useful when you're looking at your documentation to look at what's missing, and what information people are finding difficult to find. If everyone's always asking the same questions, then maybe there's some documentation that's missing that can help everybody out and save everybody time overall. So a big part of working as a designer, and not just in live service design, but it's about keeping your documentation up to date so that everyone can stay on the same page. Next up is feature work, when you get the chance to work on something new. Obviously, you make the design for things like that, but you also have to be looking at the scope of your team and the capacity that your team has to put towards that feature. One of the specific things in working on feature work in a released game or a live service game is you're working within constraints. I mentioned our game is 8 years old, so a lot of the time when we're trying to implement new features, we have to be dealing with constraints in the data or the way the game is built, which limits what we can do in the design a lot of the time, because if we were to change certain things, it would blow out the scope to a crazy degree that would make the feature untenable. There's also iteration. A big part of that is working with stakeholders, and again, changing your design to make a compromise between you and the needs of the artists, for example, or maybe you and the needs of the engineers. Often it's useful to be understanding of the difference between suggesting a difference and telling them to change something as well. That's something I had a bit of problems with when I was first starting. A lot of people were interpreting my suggestions as me telling them to do things, which obviously wasn't helping me make friends in a team. But also, a big part of being a live service designer that I think is important is being a useful ideas guy. So, in a release game, there's going to be a lot of things that could obviously be improved, but it's hard to maintain the energy to keep chasing these things down and pushing the solutions and reminding people and following up. So becoming a useful ideas guy is probably one of the best things you can do as a designer or someone working on a team, because it's difficult. Anyone can have an idea, but the difficult part is following up on it and making sure that idea is fully realized from beginning to end. Another part of live service design is researching your player base or understanding them. So, spending time in community message boards, for example, and seeing what players are doing and what they enjoy and what they don't like. I spend a bit of time directly interacting with players as a sim guru on Twitter, for example, and answering questions and sharing content. Often we'll release surveys to try and figure out what players want, what content they're interested in seeing, and what changes they would like to make and what's important to them. And often it's also playing new games, understanding trends and successes, and new live service events, for example, to see what might be useful to try and integrate into our own games. Hopefully that's been some useful insight into my job, what I do, and also how I got here. And for the end of my talk, I'm going to jump into general tips rapid fire. Work life isn't necessarily harder than student life. I was panicking because being a student was so dang hard. But when I was a student, I had multiple jobs, multiple priorities, conflicting deadlines all over the place. But in my job, I just have my job to worry about. It is way easier. Trash talking does not equal critical thinking. It also won't help you make friends or industry connections. Tool flexibility is your friend, and transferable skills are invaluable. So I use completely proprietary tools, which I had to learn when I first started my job, and a lot of studios are similar. So try not to be too precious about your medium. Learn concepts that you can apply anywhere so that your skill set is adaptable and you can always be using the right tool for the job. Use the available help. Actively look for grants and opportunities. Communicate to others about communicating with you. You're not going to be the same as everyone else. I find that unless I understand the reason behind something that we're doing, that I can get quite confrontational at work. And that's okay in a way. You know, obviously I need to keep that under control and not be a jerk, but there are benefits to that as well, and it's all about having difference in your team. Because if I am always drilling to understand something and make sure we're doing things for a reason, then I'm making sure that we're also not doing unnecessary work, and I'm also going to be making sure we're driving for the best possible solution. However, in order to prevent fights with my team, I need to communicate with them that if they're giving me a new task or we're doing something new, it really helps me to work with them if they try and communicate the reasons behind it so that I can understand. The same goes for them. When I understand how they like to receive information and how they like to receive feedback, we can reduce a lot of the conflict that we can have in the workplace because we can work around each other with a lot of mutual understanding, and in the end be a better understanding team that can work together more cohesively for it.
So thank you for your time. That's it from me. If you have any questions, I'll have my details up in a moment, but feel free to hit me up, message or email if you do want to follow up on anything. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the talk or got something out of it, and enjoy the rest of your GCAP.